when this company first started, we looked out and said, if we were to build an electrolyzer from scratch, just throw all the dogma out and everything that's known. Early on, we had a small investment from Total Energies, and then we got BP to lead the last round. We've partnered through Greentown Labs with Shell, and we've worked with Repsol in their foundation. Be opportunistic with capital raising, even though it can be a little bit uncomfortable. When you pitch and when you raise capital, there is a strong business development component. There's a sales pitch, there's a market hype, there's FOMO.
What do you see as the biggest tailwinds and headwinds at the moment? Welcome back to Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. Today I'm speaking with Chad Mason, CEO and founder of Advanced Ionics. They decided to throw out the instruction book and design an electrolyzer from scratch. Currently, they're scaling up the technology and will sell these units or stacks either directly or through licensing agreements in the future. They haven't decided yet. They're keeping that open. Today, Chad told us how he first learned about electrolysis at his family farm at age 5 in North Dakota, how his career led him to starting Advanced Ionics, why he ended up building the company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, of all places, shout out Wisconsin, how they partner with corporates for capital, pilots, and demand, and he offered his thoughts on the future of the space broadly, both the tailwinds and the headwinds. It's a great episode, and we hope you enjoy. But before you dive in, we have an ask. Wait. I promise I'm not asking you for money again. We do need to hear from you, though. Who are the most influential people in climate tech that we should speak with? Send us a message or leave us a comment on the Substack post with your recommendation and why you chose them. Thank you for your help on this. But seriously, don't just ignore us on this one. Pull out your phone, go to the Substack app, pull up this post, and drop your recommendation. Okay, enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the show, Chad. How's it going today?
Not too bad. Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak with another person who is not only from Wisconsin, but actually in Wisconsin as we speak. We're not too far away from each other. How are you doing?
Not too bad. So, I'm calling from my house on a Saturday, actually. I don't know if you disclose that to people, but yeah, here in Cudahy behind the airport in Milwaukee.
Yeah, we're one of the few, I guess, Wisconsinites, hustling on a Saturday, and I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of people who hustle here, but I just think it's not like Silicon Valley or something, right, where it's a common thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, man, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're working on today to get us started.
So I'm Chad Mason, founder and CEO of Advanced Ionics, and we're developing intermediate temperature electrolysis for industrial applications. And as I think a lot of viewers will know, all hydrogen today is used in just really a few sectors such as ammonia and petrochemicals. And we're developing a solution that basically is going to become the default technology for those industries.
So can you just kind of break that down a little bit more clearly? You're making hardware, or you've developed a technology that you're going to sell to other hardware producers? What does that look like in a little bit more kind of basic detail?
Yeah, at this point, we still have optionality on both, but we will be selling the stack for sure. And that's the technology we're developing right now. So runs at intermediate temperatures. It's water vapor electrolysis, we call it. The technology we done Symbian. And so it runs at intermediate temperatures, anywhere from that 200 to 600 degrees Celsius range. And this has been a big gap with electrolyzer technology, really since forever, because you have low temperature alkaline, runs with liquid water, well-established technology, considered reliable. It's been around about 100 years. You have proton exchange membrane technology, and it's been around, 50 plus years. And it also runs with liquid water. And then you have high temperature solid oxide technology, which is really a ceramic-based solid state. But you have to have temperatures in excess of 600 degrees Celsius in order for that to function. And so when this company first started, we looked out and said, if we were to build an electrolyzer from scratch and just throw all the dogma out and everything that's known, how should we build that? What does the industry specifically need? And we found that there were two things that were true is, one, basically you have exothermic processes such as ammonia or hydrogenation, hydrocracking, all of the things that are used to make, all the materials that we take for granted today. And the second important thing is that by not utilizing liquid water, you operate much more efficiently. You don't have to overcome the heat of vaporization of water. And so combine those two things together, we basically have a water vapor electrolyzer that utilizes the exothermic heat that's provided from all these industrial processes. So it's very elegant. It's something that industry already knows how to do with existing steam methane reformers. So it's really a plug and play solution for them that allows them to decarbonize their operations.
Okay, so and we'll get into this in more detail in a bit, but just to clarify what you're saying there is your technology can just utilize the heat that's being off put by other industrial processes, like in a manufacturing facility or like a paper mill or something, and they can use that to power the electrolyzer.
Yeah, part of the process. Basically, it's there to convert that liquid water into steam or water
Mm.
vapor.
Mhm.
And so you can't get around thermodynamics. It is what it is. It's not like, when you say someone's developing a better catalyst or a better membrane, that's fantastic, but it doesn't get around the thermodynamic challenges of liquid water electrolysis.
Mm.
And so the only way to do that is really to go into the water vapor or steam electrolysis regimes. So what's really nice then is that all of these industrial processes are running exothermic processes. So it's very elegant and it's very symbiotic. A little play on the words of Symbian, but it's very symbiotic with what we're trying to do here.
Okay, very nice. Well, let's go back a little bit. I guess how did you originally decide to get into this space in the first place? Like, what were your early inspirations as a kid? Like, I'm always curious how people decide to become an entrepreneur, and in particular, why they decide to take on very difficult challenges like these.
Yeah, being an entrepreneur, you have to be a little bit crazy to want to put yourself out there and go through the struggle. But the world wouldn't be what it is today without entrepreneurs creating businesses and doing all of the things that we do. Yeah, it really started. I grew up on a family farm in central North Dakota. And, of course, like many farm kids, you become interested in, engineering or developing things or creating new things. And so I was always very creative. I was always someone who liked to build. And I read a lot. I read a lot of science books, even when I was very, very young. And I was someone who watched a lot of Star Trek and other sci-fi shows like that too. So that was always very inspiring as well. So, fast forward a little bit. I don't know at what point, sometime in fifth or sixth grade, I ran across the concept of electrolysis, and how they pointed out, oh, you can just like put two wires in a beaker and create bubbles. And I think this is something probably a lot of kids can relate to because they ended up probably doing that experiment. But I ended up somehow deciding to stick with that. So I dove deeper into it. It was kind of one of those early times when there was a fuel cell hype bubble at the end of the 1990s time frame. So fuel cell seemed like a solution at the time, and hydrogen economy, it kind of made all sense, right? So I did dig deeper into that. I built some electrolyzers, like alkaline type, put a rod inside of a pipe, put in KOH and kind of hook it up. And I do experiments. I tried to run a lawnmower or try to improve the efficiency of my car's engine and gas mileage. So that was what I would do as a kid. And yeah, then I basically decided to make a career out of that. But
So
yeah,
so
so
you
pause there
then
for
yeah. So then did you end up just kind of studying it, or did you have any like before you ended up getting into building Advanced Ionics properly? Did you have like side hustles or things that you did as an entrepreneur before that, or was it always this technology?
this was the first, in the sense that I would do side hustles, and working on a farm is quite entrepreneurial. But then I went to college and I did a senior design project on electrolysis also. But I realized, like, in an electrical engineering program, you weren't going to really know electrolysis that well. So I ended up doing a master's at Arizona State, specifically on electrochemistry and alternative energy. And then interestingly, my travels led me over to Finland for a little while, where I worked on gas diffusion layers. And that was just a 6-month stint. And I ended up, interestingly enough, in Singapore after my master's degree finished. So what was interesting, though, is I had to switch to lithium ion batteries, and I wasn't happy about it at the time because I needed a job. But it turned out to be probably one of the best things that ever happened to me because I got to understand another completely other area of electrochemistry.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of folks don't get that perspective and that ability to, or even that opportunity, so to say, to go deep into two different electrochemical fields.
Mm.
And I also was able to interact with a lot of people who worked on solar cells, you know, photocatalysis, water technology. So I got to interact with quite a few people over in Singapore. And so when I came back to the US, I ended up ironically then getting a job in fuel cell at General Motors. But it did stick with me a lot that, as I got some free time again, I was like, well, how come like no one's doing anything about electrolysis? We're still using the same technology as when I was in the 1990s as a kid. It's like ridiculous.
Mm.
And so that was one of the genesis for starting Advanced Ionics. But
And were
there
you
was a
just
period of,
doing it like
go
were you
ahead.
just like doing it in your garage or something, like doing some tests and just kind of working on some things on the side?
No, nothing at all, actually. It was all on paper. And basically, I had the initial spark for a broad platform for some electrochemical improvements in between jobs before I came back to the US. And it stuck with me, but I didn't actually know if I was going to attempt to do like long duration battery storage, because that, of course, there was a big need for that. And there's some really awesome companies that have filled that niche finally. You have like Form and ESS, and there's a number of others. And so I didn't see that there was a lot of, or just enough market pull to go into long duration energy storage. I just thought it was going to be really an impossible uphill battle. I didn't have really a network in the United States. So I thought just the network effects would be a problem as well with trying to start an endeavor. So that's why I did end up going and getting a job at General Motors. But then as I thought about it some more, I really honed in on electrolysis, and it was interesting because that was my passion as a kid. So it did come full circle eventually.
Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. I just need a few seconds because Soma and I have two quick favors to ask. Putting out the show each week takes about 15 to 20 hours between us, so it's a lot of effort, and it would mean the world to us if you would leave a review and mention your favorite episode. Secondly, if you're not already, go over and subscribe to the podcast on Substack. The content is free, but if you like hanging out with us each week, maybe we're even the kind of guys you'd like to buy a coffee for on occasion, consider becoming a paid subscriber. For the cost of one lavender latte a month, you can help us immensely. Thank you for tuning in consistently and helping us to share our guest stories. Now back to the show.
Yeah. I guess one thing I was impressed by is you've been at this for a long time and building Advanced Ionics. It's a lot of persistence to build this. I guess what kind of keeps you going through the difficult times, because it's not always easy, right? There's not every day is rainbows and sunshine. So like how did you keep going?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say you do have to get a good night's sleep, um, and that's easier said than done when things are on your mind. But it's one thing I'm quite unwilling to compromise on. And I know there's like a lot of folks who are very famous that talk about the importance of sleep. So I think that's the number one thing, is because then you, despite like whatever challenges you face in the day, you can have a clear mind to do that. You also have to give yourself space to just de-stress and relax a bit as well. So being very particular with scheduling and like a very robust calendaring system is something I've had to learn over the past, three plus years. It doesn't make everybody on the outside happy because a lot of people who send me emails get auto reject notices. But like, if you don't do that, one, you won't have mental sanity, and two, you won't actually get real work done. So your business will suffer quite a bit. And then I think the other part of that is, it can't be understated. The support network is quite critical, and and for entrepreneurs that don't have enough of a support network, I would strongly recommend working on that to build connections with people. Milwaukee has a great founders community, and then when I started this company, I mentioned to my wife, like, this is what I want to do, and if she hadn't bought into it, I wouldn't do it. And so that is absolutely critical. And it wasn't just like she was just saying in the moment, yeah, go do that. It was like, I know exactly what this is going to take. This is a very long-term commitment and very hard. And he said, yes, you need to do this. So that is very important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't really succeed if you have no support on that side, right? That is super important. I think recently when I started my company, I had the same thing with my wife. I had to make sure she was in on in on the plan.
Yeah.
I guess so. Let's go back to the technology in the company a bit. So you told us kind of high level what you're doing, but can you break it down for somebody who, again, just imagine somebody like me who's definitely not an engineer, has no understanding of how these things work. Just explain the basic technology like you're explaining to a 5-year-old. How does this work?
Yeah. Well, just a few years and I'll be telling it to my kid at that point. Yeah, so, folks have, going back to that example of two wires in a beaker, anybody can do this at home. You can take, baking soda is probably your easiest. Take baking soda, put it in distilled or reverse osmosis water, and then you can basically attach two wires from any DC power supply, like a computer power supply or whatever you find, not from the wall. And you can basically see bubbles evolve, and that's hydrogen and oxygen. So
So
that's
sorry, so just to clarify, what's happening is you said that you have distilled water and you put baking soda, and
yeah,
what's happening is you're passing electricity through the water and it's causing a reaction.
yeah. Basically, you're evolving. So water is H2O, and you're evolving basically the hydrogen on the cathode, so the negative side, and you're evolving oxygen on the anode side. And basically, there's an ion transfer that's occurring, which is dependent on which salt you put in solution. But yeah, it's pretty.
And so this is called electrolysis, like electricity through liquids, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Usually water, right?
yeah.
So
And if
are there a lot of technologies out there that use this already? I mean, this is like a pretty widely, like very, very common thing within the metals space, correct? As well as other things.
Yeah, glad you asked. So the most common things that people touch today that use electrolysis, one, as you alluded to, the metals, is aluminum refinery. Refining is done this way, except at very high temperatures, molten salt baths that they use. And then the other big one is basically bleach
Hmm.
and drain cleaners, like sodium hydroxide. So right now, chloralkali process, and I think there's actually a plant in central Wisconsin, among other places in the United States. They basically can take salt water and you split it into chlorine, sodium
Mm.
hydroxide, and then you can do other things with those products downstream as well. But also, going from there, a lot of the solutions that are being developed for the clean energy industry are based on electrolysis or other electrolytic processes. And so, hydrogen is actually probably one of the most simple examples. There's some very creative use of electrochemistry that are being developed, decarbonizing cement or decarbonizing iron and steel and carbon sequestration. There's just quite a large plethora these days.
Okay, got it. So then when you get to what you guys are building, so just tell us more about that specifically. What does it look like in principle? What are the components? Do you need water, electricity, and heat? Like, and how does it work as an outcome? How do you capture the output?
Yeah, yeah. So taking that example from the beaker, the tabletop example, basically if you're to say, well, how do we make a device where we can make a lot of them really large that's highly efficient and very low cost? Basically, it looks very similar in a sense to like your car battery. If you're to crack open your car battery, you have a lot of plates in there and you have liquid or you have a gel or a glass mat in between those plates. So conceptually, it's very similar. We call that a cell, and the cells are stacked together. And then basically to deliver the liquid or the gases and to bring them out, we have manifolds. So anyone who's taken apart a car engine, those have manifolds. Conceptually quite similar in the stack context as well. So manifolds bring gas in and then basically sweep it across the plates, and the plates will have the anode and the cathode, and then some kind of separator like a diaphragm or a membrane or something like that that's in the middle, in between the cathode and the anode. And that keeps them electrically separated from one another so they don't short circuit. And it also facilitates the passage of ions from one side to the other. So a lot of these are very analogous to, what you see with a lead acid battery. So people can kind of use that as a baseline example. And of course, people can Google what a stack looks like, and there's some really nice drawings out there.
And then so you're producing the stack. So I guess I want to go back a little bit to you talked about deciding, hey, there was nobody working on this. I think it's something I can do because I love it and I just see an opportunity here.
Yeah.
How did those early days look? Did you go out and raise funding? Were you able to find like a research lab to start funding things? How did you actually get going? And then take us all the way through to when you land your first customer.
Yeah. So we were not a university spin out, and I've actually been running into a few more entrepreneurs these days, even just 2 days ago here in Milwaukee, that were not university spinouts. And so we were one of them where really it was an idea, and I had built up enough materials knowledge. And this is why I said it was really important for me to go pretty deep into a few different verticals, because if I had just stayed in fuel cell and hydrogen, I would do what everybody else does, which is, oh, here's a proton exchange membrane I can buy off the shelf, and I can maybe play around with it and make it a little better, or I can make this catalyst. Whereas, having the background of working across multiple verticals, I was able to just kind of pull myself out of the rabbit hole and say, like, all right, like we need to just really throw out everything we know. Another big point that I think is not appreciated is that most electrolyzer technologies are really derivatives of fuel cell technology. Naturally, a lot of funding, flowed to fuel cell research in the past few decades. And so many, many labs have been well set up for that type of work with solid oxide, with proton exchange membranes. And so naturally, as the funding environment shifts and kind of where all the hype is to electrolysis, a lot of labs have been able to very elegantly transition. Problem is those are materials that we don't believe are going to be the right solution for electrolysis. So you're once again stuck with kind of the fuel cell way of thinking or old dogma. So that's something we basically threw out. I'd say the more important thing too for us is we brought in a very multidisciplinary team as well. So, I can only claim a piece of the pie, right? We brought in people who have experience with lead acid batteries, with high temp superconductors, with textiles, with all sorts of different fuel cell and electrolyzer technologies, battery technologies. So you really need that broad multidisciplinary team to do something like what we're doing. So it's both like a good and a bad thing. Good in the end, of course, but difficult to originally do the hiring and assemble the team and put the ideas together.
How did you, I guess, get going with funding then? Did you go out and raise money based off of the idea and your kind of background to get, or did you just convince people to come, work on this for free initially until you guys got some traction to go raise money?
Yeah. So I ended up moving to Milwaukee specifically. You asked prior about, I basically needed a place to do this work. And so at the time, there was a program called Workbench Labs, kind of like a mini little incubator accelerator program. It actually doesn't exist anymore, sadly enough. And a lot of great companies have gone through it. We're just one of them, but like SwitchSource and Clear Flame and Meaty Foods out in Boulder, like all these companies have gone through this program as well. And so when I got there and I checked it out, they're like, oh yeah, you can use this space, do whatever you want, and it's free, and then it's pretty cheap afterwards. And it was an old building that was used by Eaton Corporation for like electronics, switchgear development, breaker boxes, things like that. So it was pretty ideal. I ended up getting a pretty cheap apartment here and starting work in this program, but I was all by myself. So that's not a good situation, of course. Like the most successful startups generally have a partner or a team as a founding component. So I did look for getting some kind of partner. I didn't really care what that person did as long as they got along with me and they were smart.
Right.
And luckily I found Bill, named Bill Murray, not the comedian, although he certainly thinks he's funny. But yeah, so then we started developing some concepts together. And of course, in startup school, they teach you go find a beachhead market. So we're like, oh, well, we'll build this little lab scale alkaline electrolyzer and it'll be cheaper than all these like ridiculously overpriced ones that everybody else sells. And we started pitching, and we had some connections into clean energy ventures in Boston, interestingly enough, through the Workbench Labs program. And so we started talking to them, and, just to like paraphrase at a very high level, they're like, don't waste your time on that little thing over there. And because we were telling them, here's our long-term vision. We want to do intermediate temperature electrolysis. This is why it matters. And interestingly enough, they were digging deep into the hydrogen market themselves as a venture capital firm to figure out what their thesis should be. It just so happens that we were actually talking to each other about the same exact thing. And, I guess we both quickly realized that. But they did say, go get a bit more data, because we had zero data, pretty much zero data. And so and then COVID hit. And so in the middle of COVID, we're basically getting parts from McMaster-Carr shipped overnight and a few other places. And we're basically cobbling together like a mini steam generator on the cheap and putting together some hand-built like little pellets to basically show that the concept even has some traction. And so we were able to get like barely enough data to say that, yeah, the concept, probably is working. And then that triggered our first, basically pre-seed investment. And so to your point, coming full circle, is the first money was basically my own for quite a while, bootstrapping, and then venture capital. So no grant funding initially, which is really the opposite of how it often happens.
Yeah, man, I think that's really fascinating. I appreciate the context there. I guess from this point, where did you, first of all, clarify for us, who do you sell to, and how did you end up landing your kind of first customer, first, future offtake agreement? I don't know how this space works exactly.
Yeah. So very early on, when you're trying to do something like this, it's very, very challenging from how you look at the type of capital you need to raise in order to continue to scale and go to an exit, whether that's because once you take VC funding, you've pretty much decided as a team, we're going to go for some kind of an exit that looks like an IPO or a large scale acquisition down the line. And so you really look at it and you say, well, how do you prove the technology and develop relationships and build first of the kind plants without completely burning through all of your equity and being very capital efficient? So first thing, being in Wisconsin, very capital efficient. Like it's just a fantastic place to do this type of work, and it's very underappreciated. The second thing is acquiring partners early on, people that have internally at the C-suite level a mandate to have innovation, to work on green technologies, decarbonize certain parts of their operation. And so we basically have found this with a lot of our European partners and our Japanese partners, in that they have that mandate at the top to take action, to move. And so early on, we had basically a small investment from Total Energies, although they eventually later then spun out their entire venture capital arm later. So they're not investors anymore. And then we basically got BP to lead the last round, and they've been really fantastic to work with. We've partnered in the past through Greentown Labs with Shell, and we've worked with Repsol in their foundation as well. And we'll have some more announcements coming up as well. But we absolutely love working with all of these companies. And people may not immediately think of the names I just listed as like companies that are working hard to decarbonize. But for them, they really need to figure out how to create green ammonia and how to create green materials for all the things we produce, and how to do this in the most cost-effective manner possible. And they have a lot of capacity, or basically need, for hydrogen too. And they already know how to demo new processes at refineries. They do this all the time, new reactors, new catalysis processes. So we've we found that this has been a really great route to help de-risk and retire risk from the technology, even at a very early stage.
And so the reason for this being mainly that they invest because they also will use the technology if they can prove it. So they're maybe even giving you opportunities to test it on existing projects, or there's just various kind of throughput. It's not just money and then you got to go find a partner. It's a money and a partner who will potentially buy it all in one.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Develop, be an early mover as far as purchasing units from the factory as well.
Mm-hmm. So in essence, then landing your first customer was through the investment process, right? So you had somebody who would be a customer who could at least make introductions for you as part of your investor base.
So the first, I would probably frame it that way. We have an interesting relationship. Like every partner I've listed there, it's a slightly different twist on the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, Repsol has not invested in Advanced Ionics, but we work with them very closely. Same basically story of Shell. They have not invested in Advanced Ionics. A little different though with Total having prior invested, and BP have invested. So each relationship we build, we really customize it for what fits best. We're not going to go in and say it has to be like this, X, Y, and Z. One, we're not in a position to do that. And two, we're here to create really win-win situations for everybody. And that looks a little bit different for each partner.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. And I guess over the course of doing this, if you're willing to share some of these examples, because I think there's so many opportunities for people to learn from the people who've walked the trail. What are some of the biggest, let's call it, mistakes that you made, or things that if you were to go back and do it again, you would do it differently because it would save you time or save you money? Like, what are the biggest things you would go back and change / mistakes?
Well, it's hard to say if if making X change would have had Y effect that was much more positive. One thing I would always recommend entrepreneurs to do is, be opportunistic with capital raising. Even though it can be a little bit uncomfortable at times. I think there were some times when we probably could have taken advantage of some cycles in the market a little bit better, and done timing a little bit better, because people just think that raising capital is really like, I have an awesome product and investors are going to run and give me money. And that isn't the case. Like, when you pitch and when you raise capital, there is a strong business development component. There's a sales pitch, there's a market hype, there's FOMO, right? And so you do need to be very cognizant of these things that may not seem entirely rational to a new entrepreneur, but these are dynamics that exist as well. Another thing too is I would recommend always doubling and tripling down on what your team's strengths are. I think overall we've done really well at this. But anytime we haven't, or we ignore a gap, that can eventually bite you, right? And the team is very stretched thin. Like if you're in a startup and you're not stretched thin, I wonder a bit why. Not saying that's always a good thing. Like, it's not necessarily a good thing, but it is generally just a fact of the matter. And so the one thing is, you get a lot of advice about it. It should be this way based upon how someone else did it here, how it used to be. And you as leader need to take a lot of intake. Like, you have a lot of intake of advice and ideas coming in, and you have to filter it out, and it's very tough to do that. You have to have a thesis, you have to be willing to learn, to admit failure, but you also have to sift through it and ultimately make a decision. And you need to not be too attached to one way of doing things such that it blinds you to alternatives. So for example, like myself and Ignacio, my chief commercial officer, we do quite a bit of the investments work. We raise the funds for the company, and we have some help from some of the other team members. And we've had to optimize how we tag team on that versus kind of like what's normally the way of doing it, which is like the CEO just does everything. Well, if I was just doing everything on the investments, then I wouldn't be managing the company very effectively. I'd be doing a very terrible job at that. And I am very passionate about making sure the company is a very well-oiled machine, right? So we work really well to like figure out what's the best use of him, what's the best use to me at the right situations when investors want to talk to me about strategy, the plan, the finances, the engineering, all those kind of things. So that's just one dynamic, and I hope it resonates on some level with people.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's I on that topic, I guess I want to ask you, as a very technical founder, how do you, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about when you brought in a commercial person, but like how do you manage? There's probably some things that you maybe understand, but you're not like the best at because you're more of a technical person. How did you navigate understanding, okay, I need to bring somebody else in who knows what I don't know here? Like, can you just talk about that? Because there's a lot of people in climate who are very technical in nature, and they need to bring in partners to help them kind of grow to the next stages.
Yeah, I highly recommend bringing in partners no matter what. It's just like what skill sets do you need in the early stage? And a lot of times that early culture sets the culture for the rest of the company, both the good and the bad. It's different in every situation. I generally you'll hear people oversimplify this, way oversimplify this. And you can Google it, you can read advice, and you should definitely take stock of that wholeheartedly. But you do have to customize it to your situation. So what I did is I spent all of basically 2017 and almost a big chunk of 2018 just doing a pretty deep amount of market research. I went to a lot of conferences. I went overseas. I talked to people about my ideas, and people would probably wonder, like, who's this guy who's just telling me about intermediate temperature? Like, he has nobody. He has no team. He has nothing. But that was very beneficial because I put together a strategy, a very, very deep strategy with a lot of complexity and nuance, because hydrogen is that way, that all of it remains true to this day. Like everything I had figured out and strategized on in 17 and 18 holds true. And that's not to say we don't make adjustments and we don't course correct and pivot on these little things, but like the thesis remains what it is. So that gave me a lot of confidence to do certain portions of the business development at a very, very early stage when it was more about the tech. Right? Because if you don't develop the tech, nothing else matters. And this was actually a fascinating thing because we did get a lot of advisors early on, and that continues to be case and to be true. And that is something I also recommend a lot of entrepreneurs do, is do get a lot of advisors from very diverse backgrounds. But this is where it got complicated, is some were saying, hire a biz dev person now as your like third person or fourth person. And other people were like, well, if you hire a biz dev person, they won't have anything to do and they'll quit. And I think one of my advisors gave me an example of a startup where they went through 7 or 8 biz devs because they came in and realized there was nothing to sell and they wanted to leave. And all the partners just wanted to talk to the CEO. They didn't want to talk to the biz dev person. Now, like I say, it depends on every startup. If you can get a biz dev person that can think at a very high level, very strategically, and can integrate into other facets of the organization and not just be pure sales and marketing, but can be like product strategy, product design, or can plug into the admin or do some other things operational, then yes, you should definitely bring that person in right away. But for us, like, it just didn't shake out. We weren't meeting the right person. And then just this past year, we started to really need to have this person. And Ignacio became available as well. And like when we first met, you kind of like, you're a match, right? Like, you can work here. I want to work with you. And so it just fell into place really nicely. So.
Yeah, I guess on the same topic of advisors and people, I'd be curious who, if you were given a chance to like say, with a microphone and say, hey, I want to thank all these people for helping make, who have been the companies and people along this journey that have been the most helpful to you? Mentors, just people who are willing to kind of sit down and work through these things with you. Any people that have really been an impact on helping you achieve this journey that aren't necessarily in the company?
Yeah, there's actually far too many to list. The person who's been with us the longest and continues to be is John Roberwich. And he's affiliated with Clean Energy Ventures as an angel investor. But he's been incredibly important to our success here. But I mean, there's a lot of folks. There's even some folks that work with us part time that are very, very experienced as well, that have other kind of big gigs besides working with us.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of former General Electric people. It's just kind of funny how that's kind of just fallen into place, but there's like an ecosystem of almost 10 former GE people, GE Healthcare, GE Aerospace,
Yeah.
people that work with us, and they're amazing to work with. And then folks from just a variety of other disciplines as well.
Yeah. It is interesting. There's a lot of really great talent that came out of GE. So I think you're probably not the only company who leans on that. One thing I did want to address or ask you about is there seems to be, if you're looking at producing electrolyzers, like there's a concern with some people, kind of their bearish take is, hey, there's not going to be enough demand to buy, like there will be electrolyzers, people are going to buy them, but even if we improve the efficiency, there's not that much demand still. Do you what is your take on that? I mean, broadly speaking, do you think, yes, that's sort of true, but as time goes on, it will just continue to grow? Or do you think that, hey, based off of more efficiency, there will be more use cases for it? Like, how do you visualize that in terms of the total addressable market?
Yeah, I have a very nuanced take on it. I'm not always. It's funny because I remember back when I just left the battery field. I think I went to a hydrogen conference, and they were just like poo-pooing batteries quite a bit. And I was just sitting there thinking, I'm like, this is just painful to hear because batteries are going to eat fuel cells lunch for transportation. And so I think the hydrogen industry is a fantastic, wonderful, collaborative industry, like, just amazing people to work with, but it does suffer from too much groupthink or just like optimism sometimes, at like how versatile the molecule is. And that really sucks people into a big kind of thinking trap a lot of times. So to your point, I'm very, very optimistic about industrial decarbonization and expansion of hydrogen into some sectors like steel. I'm very bearish about its expansion into anything that's not industrial. So yeah, I
Okay,
sit
got it.
on both sides of the fence.
So broadly speaking, industrial use case is a huge opportunity, but other things maybe not so much. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. I guess one thing I'd like to move on to a little bit is on the macro, like what do you see as the biggest challenges in the next kind of stages of your growth, but also for the industry broadly? And you, like, if you were to try to, do your best at a crystal ball looking through what's going to happen, what do you see as the biggest tailwinds and headwinds at the moment?
Yeah. With the industry as a whole, it's gone through a lot of hype cycles before, and it's on, at least my view, is a good chunk of it is on the downward slope of the hype cycle again. So it'll go through some kind of valley here. I wouldn't say it's a valley of death, but it'll be a valley of despair for a little while, where I think you'll start to see some consolidation in the industry, especially on the low temperature electrolysis side, just because there's a lot of really nice ideas out there, but I don't think there's enough space for so much of what essentially is the same thing. So I think that's one aspect of it. Another one is, I was talking to one of our advisors the other day, and it's something that we kind of imply a lot, but we don't say out loud, is, he was telling me that the big issue with the industry, or even for us, isn't like what our competition is doing as far as like other electrolyzer companies. It's the competition is kind of a spin on the old do nothing. Like your competition is a customer to do nothing. in a sense that you see a lot of projects that are not reaching FID, final investment decision. Like it's ridiculous actually, the ratios. So only a small portion of proposed hydrogen projects are reaching FID. There's a myriad of reasons why this is. I mean, part of it is just the continuation of uncertainty with the IRA, but you see worldwide too that there was just like a lot of bad techno-economics and bad politics underpinning a lot of proposed projects with hydrogen. They just never made sense in the first place because it just doesn't pencil out. You could do it in a few cells on a spreadsheet. I just don't know how that people came to the conclusion on some of these. And so that's where the course correction will be. But through that, you're going to see strong projects being proposed will make the operator, the customer, the developer money. So through that will be a lot of strength for the industry. And then we'll start to see actual decarbonization of these industries. For us, basically everything wants to see something that looks like what traditional alkaline does, which is the reliability and the maintainability of existing alkaline electrolysis, which has been around a long time. It's well proven, it's well bankable, right? And so for the challenge for us is to basically demonstrate that as quickly as possible with a brand new technology that's been built from scratch. And this is getting back to the partnership. This is specifically why we're doing it with partners at an early stage. They'll be on the inside. They'll be more likely to purchase the final product because they'll understand the in and outs of it. So that's a little bit in a nutshell, but I can always go deeper on specific topics.
No, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I oftentimes think about when you look at the Industrial Revolution originally, like there was a lot of innovation that was happening because there was no preconceived ideas. But then you get something that effectively works well and you stick with it, right? You stick with it because now you've built, a multi-billion-dollar business. And the truth is, I mean, I think people underestimate this. I've said this several times on the show, but people underestimate how fragile people think these businesses are. They're afraid that if they, breathe sideways, they're going to destroy the whole thing. So they're very afraid to try new things. And even though the new thing might be more efficient, that whole, past idea where the founders were leading these things back in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, they were willing to take these risks because they were building it. But now it's managers, it's CEOs. Like these people are just there to keep things going. They're not willing to, to try new things. So I think it's really interesting. You can find ways to navigate that and to get people to try new things or find the partners who are open to trying those things and just finding ways to de-risk it for them. This is like essentially the core challenge of innovation in industry because, things are more fragile than you think. People tend to not think that because it's a multi-billion-dollar business. How could it be fragile? But it's not. It has a lot of people running it who have their own, conceived notions and maybe their own childhood traumas about breaking things.
And to me, it just seems like a lot of industry has decided to outsource this creativity to startups. I'm on the fence if that's a good or a bad thing. Ask me 10 years from now, but it's essentially is what it is. But if it can be done effectively where capital can flow to innovative companies, I think it can result in good outcomes. There's something else about just like when you're running a startup, we're just ridiculously capital efficient. Like there's just no way a large company or the mothership can be that capital efficient as we are. I mean, it has its downsides, no doubt, but so there's something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just recently heard the story of, I'm trying to remember exactly the details of it. It was on, I believe it was on Acquired, on the Microsoft episode of Acquired, and they were talking about how IBM, they did I believe it was IBM, they had a super tiny team that had to go and build this new, I think is when they were going into PCs, and they needed a super, super small team to do it, even though it was a huge company, right? Like they needed somebody who was fast. So I think it's just a really interesting dynamic. And I don't think that a lot of managers of these big businesses understand it well, unfortunately. Maybe it's fortunate for the innovators, but in some ways it's unfortunate for other people. But one last thing I do want to touch on before we close off is you've talked about Wisconsin being a good place because of capital efficiency and just like generally it's a good place. It's completely not what I would have thought either. So what has been talent? What has it been like trying to find talent here? Like, especially Milwaukee. Like, I know it used to be a very big industrial center. There's still a lot of manufacturing in Wisconsin broadly, but how have you found kind of finding people who are willing to join, let's call it an early stage startup, something that's a little bit more risky than what they're used to? Like, what has that been like?
Yeah, there's a lot of threads there. So one is there's a variety of people that are from Wisconsin that want to move back, and they're in kind of that stage of their life, especially folks that might be in their 30s or 40s in their mid-career. So we're seeing a good amount of that. The second is we have been able to bring talent in from out of state relatively successfully because they love what we're doing or they see the quality of life here, or there's a variety of factors. The other one is folks that are here, especially a lot of young folks, they want to do something that matters. They want a company aligned with their goals, with how they think about the world. And our mission, of course, is well aligned with that, to decarbonize heavy industry. And so you get a lot of folks that they're like, I just want to work in a clean tech startup, and I know you guys exist. Another one that we've seen a little bit lately is a few people have recently told us, I was waiting for you to post a job that I could apply to. I was waiting and waiting, and finally you posted one that was my fit, and I applied. And so I really love hearing those stories as well. We have struggled with certain disciplines if they don't exist here, especially like chemical engineering really exists more in Houston. But that is why we do have one person in Houston. So.
Yeah, I think it's I appreciate the perspective. I guess I would not have there's some things on the surface I would not have thought of, but if you dig into it, if you're one of the very few climate tech startups in the space or in the area, I should say geographically, you have more opportunity to capture the talent who wants to work there, regardless, like you said, like regardless of what they're just waiting for the right job. So that's encouraging to hear. Maybe something for other people to consider, which is going to, let's call it an underappreciated area that might have some advantages. Maybe there's some challenges that come along with it, but you can kind of think about it and make the trade-offs versus just going to the hub because everybody else goes to the hub, right? Finding a way to work around that. So anyways, man, this has been a pleasure. I really am fascinated by what you guys are doing. Obviously, again, big fan because you're in Wisconsin. Tell everybody, where can they reach you? What's your call to action? How can people follow?
Yeah, so basically you can reach out to our company in LinkedIn. You can fill in a form on the website. I'm a little bit hard to get a hold of, unfortunately.
That's all right.
My LinkedIn and my email inbox is very deep right now, and I feel terrible about it every day. Just stay at it, and we'll try to answer.
Fair play. Maybe if you really need something, go around, find another way in, right? Get creative.
Yeah. But yeah, we do have a website form. Just say I heard chat on the podcast and I want to chat. It'll get filtered to the right people.
Awesome,
and then my executive assistant, it's just EA at advanced-ionics.com too. It's
very nice. Awesome, Chad. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to seeing how you guys go in the next couple of years, and we'll have to. I did promise you at some point I'll be coming down for a visit, so I will make that happen. It's just been crazy. Started my own shop as well, so I will get down there.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Definitely stop by anytime, and yeah, very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. All right, welcome to the takeaway section. Thank you guys so much for spending the time with us. Let's get into it. So there were a couple things that really stood out to me with this episode with Chad. One of those being the reason why they seem to be doing well is they threw out all assumptions and started from scratch. Where most companies kind of make a variation on the fuel cell, they're trying to improve some aspect of it. They started basically from nothing. And there's people who do this who end up not being successful because they're not thinking about playing with the existing partners, but they took everything from zero while keeping that in mind. How can we integrate with the other partners in the space? Keep de-risking things, making sure things are reliable. So you have to have both. You can't just throw everything out and say, we're going to reinvent it from scratch because, if you're not considering the buyer, you will not have luck. So that was really interesting. The second thing is how they are a ruler of the rule. That's the term I came up with for this,
by being in an area where there isn't as much climate tech stuff going on, i.e., Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it's not really a climate hub per se. They are able to win attention from the people who want to work in climate. He shared how many people have been keeping an eye on their website, just waiting for a job to come up that suits them. I think this is something I don't believe anybody else on the show has done, or at least not mentioned specifically. They usually want to go to a place where there is a lot of talent in that space. And, as he shared, there are some cases where they struggle to find talent, but for the majority of things, they do have the talent and they have the eyeballs because they're the only dog in town. Finally, he brought up how they partner with corporates in different capacities, and not all of them are investors, but they work with people who have a mandate for innovation. And this is something nearly every successful hardware startup that has come on the pod has done. They all have some form of partnering with these people. So just highlighting it as a theme that is continuing across these. So if you are building a hardware startup and you're not already doing that, you got to figure out how to do that. Find people who can help you get through these phases without having to destroy your equity table and build out a factory or something, right? Just go do it smart. Find the people who can partner with you. That's all for today. Do us a favor. If you enjoyed, share with a friend. If you hated it, get into a comment battle with us on Substack. We could use a little of excitement in our lives, so feel free to do that. And we will see you next time on Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs.